Welcome, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll just give everyone in the waiting room a minute here to log on, and we'll get started. It's good to see a lot of familiar names. Welcome.
As we're sitting and waiting, there are rockets being fired out of Gaza.
Right now? Oh, yeah.
As we sit here,
Right. And we will ask you about
there,
that.
there was a Houthi missile about an hour ago.
Uh, Not good. Well,
So
I'm going to start by asking you. Let me introduce you. Then I'm going to start by asking you just
okay,
about that and tell us. I want you to tell everyone where you are, which I think I know where you are, but I think you're
yeah,
in northern Israel.
I'm in northern Israel, and if you hear sirens and I get up and run,
Right. We know why. That's right. That's right. Well, let me start by introducing you, Elliot Chodoff. First of all, thank you for joining us, and I want to thank everybody on the call for joining us. These leadership sessions are a great opportunity for those of us at Hasbara Fellowships to get everyone together. We have on the call here in Zoom, we have some of the students watching the live stream, and we'll have others watching the recording later. And so we have our Hasbara students, we have our alumni, and we have those of you who make our work possible, our donor network as well. And it's a great chance to get everyone together. And it's important. It's an important thing to just keep engaging in this way and keep up our continued education. You know, we have the job to stand up for Israel and stand up to the anti-Semitism that we're seeing far too often on university campuses. And the first step is education. We have to know what is going on, and we have to know it well. And so that's why we take those of you, our students, our Hasbara fellows, we take you to Israel for 2 weeks at a time to just learn all of this stuff. And we have expert educators like Elliot, who spent a lot of time with our Hasbara fellows in Israel, and we have the opportunity to follow up here with these leadership sessions via Zoom. So thank you everyone for joining, and it's my pleasure to introduce Elliot Chodoff, who I'll just say a few words about you. Elliot, maybe
okay.
I'll start with your official bio, which is you're a major in the reserves of the IDF major, and a professor of military science at the University of Haifa, and very
Former,
frequent. Sorry?
retired.
Former professor at the University of Haifa, and frequent author, frequent guest lecturer in many places. And for us at Hasbara, you're one of my favorite educators. You've spent a lot of time with our students, oftentimes 2 days at a time. You've taken us around the Gaza border many times, and spent many times up in the northern borders as well, where usually we'd go spend one day touring the Lebanon border and another day in the Golan Heights overlooking Syria. And so over many hours, you've educated many of our Hasbara fellows, Elliot, and you've educated me personally. So it's it's great to be able to talk to you in this format, in this forum, and I think we all have a lot of questions for you. But
I'm sure.
I think maybe we'll let you start by just telling us what's going on now for a few minutes, and then I do want to kind of zoom out and kind of resist the urge to talk about what's going now, and for you to just tell us the trends and tell us kind of what you're looking at around the region and what Israel is facing.
Okay, so the most immediate is that as we were sitting here, Iron Dome alerts out of Gaza, and I can't say more than that because it's literally happening as we speak. There was a Houthi missile that was fired about an hour ago and intercepted, and had pretty much all of the population of the center of Israel in safe rooms and shelters and that sort of thing. So that's part of the kind of daily life. But really, let's go around Israel. We'll start with Gaza because that's the most immediate, but it's not necessarily the most serious, intense in terms of Israel's national security. As everybody knows, the news has misreported as of a week ago that the ceasefire ended as Israel began striking Hamas targets in Gaza. So I say misreported because the ceasefire actually ended 2.5 weeks before that. We just didn't start shooting. And in order to understand that, we need to understand a few things about terminology before we actually get into the realities of what's going on. So, Alan, since you and I are interacting, I'm going to throw this at you, and it's a setup, but it's too bad. When did the war with Hamas begin? Or maybe you've been listening to me enough that you know the real answer.
1987.
That's very good. You have been listening. Very good. That's right. The war with Hamas began with the inception of Hamas, whose purpose is to destroy Israel. Now, the other end of that is that when people talk about ending the war, what they're really saying is they want to end this Israeli offensive against Hamas. Because the war will continue as long as there is either a Hamas or an Israel. Because they want to wipe us out and we're being uncooperative. So that's the kind of frame we have to start with. The second is, and this is true in Gaza as well as with Hezbollah in the north. We don't have ceasefire agreements with either Hamas or Hezbollah, whether it's by proxy or whatever. What we have are agreements, and with Hamas right now we don't have any agreements, but let's say with Hezbollah as well, we have agreements that include ceasefires. Now, this is a very, very important distinction. And those who've heard me in the past know that I'm not postmodern. I really believe that words have meanings, and the words here really do make a difference. A ceasefire agreement means that both sides agree not to shoot at each other. An agreement that includes a ceasefire means that there are other conditions. So with Hamas up until March 1st, the conditions included exchanging hostages for terrorists in Israeli prisons. It included Israel moving forces around and withdrawing some of them. It included humanitarian aid being pushed into Gaza, and it included a ceasefire. But what that means is that Hamas, which, by the way, violated the agreement even before it went into effect, Hamas could violate the agreement without actually shooting at Israel. And they did that repeatedly in the course of the period of the agreement, which ended on, as I said before, on March 1st. The original talks, negotiations, included the idea of negotiating a second phase, but the second phase was not a guarantee. In other words, the first stage was not predicated on the second. That agreement ended. Hamas refused to extend it, despite all efforts by the Americans. And here I pushed the Americans into it, Steve Witkoff in particular, but Bueller had his part in it as well. The Qataris, the Egyptians, Hamas refused. Israel, for a little over 2 weeks, in the possibility that the negotiators would be able to get Hamas to come to an agreement to release more hostages, didn't open fire, didn't return to what it could have returned to already on March 2nd. So the end of the ceasefire, once again, was the end of the period of the agreement. The Israeli decision to begin firing at Hamas was one that was made some 2 weeks later. Now, here, frankly, there is no good answer to, is this a good idea or a bad idea? And you know, the pro side says this is the only way to do it, and the anti side, particularly the what is known as the Hostage Families Forum, which by the way does not represent all of the hostage families, but the forum that's sort of in the grand demonstrations, we're sacrificing the hostages for a useless war, and so on and so forth. Neither side is actually correct, because when we're dealing with an organization like Hamas, and I don't think I have to go into the graphics of who we're dealing with, but if I do, please ask and I'll be happy to. There's no right answer. In other words, doing nothing can endanger the hostages. Going to war could endanger the hostages. Full scale, partial scale, whatever, it might work and it might not work. And here I don't envy the people who are in the decision-making position. But now that Israel is trying to solve for two simultaneous and conflicting equations. There were two objectives set on October 8th when the October 7th massacre kind of ended and Israel sort of turned it around and said, okay, now what's our response going to be? The two grand objectives that were established were to destroy Hamas and to get the hostages back. And these are parallel. They're not necessarily in conflict, but they're not necessarily in concert either. In other words, there may come a point where a decision has to be made to choose one over the other. At this particular point in time, and I say this in the narrow sense of tomorrow morning, it's in Israel here, it's 9 p.m., a little after 9 p.m. By tomorrow morning, some of the things that I'm saying tonight may already be incorrect because things change that quickly and things move that quickly. But as of where we're sitting at this moment, the Israeli military operations in Gaza are on what I call a throw the switch stop kind of a mode. And let me explain what I mean by that. They began with airstrikes. Now, airstrikes are the easiest to turn off. I mean, even aircraft in the air can be called back. So that if Hamas wakes up in 10 minutes from now and says, okay, we're ready to deal, let's negotiate and we'll sit down and seriously negotiate, everything that Israel has done up until this point can be stopped, literally the throw of a switch. The forces that were sent into Gaza on the ground were also very light forces. They were what I would call enhanced raiding forces. And their purpose is to go in, disrupt. We've been killing Hamas leaders primarily. There has not been heavy combat. And by the way, I hate to say it this way because it's horrible and tragic, but one of the ways we know that there hasn't been heavy combat is because of the low number of casualties, 0 on the Israeli side. Now, at some point, and we're threatening this, at some point that's going to change. But up until where we are at the moment, the combined efforts on the ground and in the air in Gaza are meant primarily to pressure Hamas to negotiate over the rest of the hostages. At some point, a decision is likely to be made, and it's above my pay grade, but this is the direction. A decision is likely to be made with reason in saying Hamas is not interested in returning any more hostages. And hold that thought for a moment parenthetically. I'll come back to it in a second. And at that point, the government is going to say, okay, the objective of returning the hostages now remains a high objective, but goes to low probability of accomplishment. And we are now going to shift all of our weight to the other objective, which is destruction of Hamas. And that means moving a force of 4 or 5 divisions into Gaza. In other words, a scale similar to what we saw in October, November 2023, but with much higher intensity fighting for a variety of reasons. One, the backing of the American administration. And I don't want to go into American politics, but let's be clear, this administration is much more unequivocal in its backing of Israel's military operations than the previous ones. And I want to be very clear on this. This isn't about who's more pro-Israel and who's less pro-Israel and who's better and who's worse. One took one approach, the other's taking another approach. If Israel chooses a military option, this administration is giving it much more backing. Second, when Israel went in, when the IDF went into Gaza initially, it was with a great hesitancy, especially in the aftermath of October 7th, as to the actual capability of the ground forces in fighting in a very difficult urban above and below ground environment against a well-organized, well-trained terrorist army, well-equipped terrorist army like Hamas. Those doubts were resolved in the course of the first year of fighting. In other words, the IDF proved itself on the ground from the bottom up and from the top down that it is perfectly capable of handling the Hamas that it faced a year ago, plus the Hamas that we face today. And I'm sure you've seen reports that they've rebuilt their ranks and they've recruited more and they're back up to 15,000 or 20,000 or 25,000. Let's keep in mind, these people are not of the same combat quality of the 20,000 we killed over the previous year. In other words, whatever they managed to do in round one, they are absolutely incapable of doing in round two. So that's kind of where we're sitting. And what I'm watching is, and the threats are there, and we've actually released photographs of the 36th Armored Division and its tanks, and you might have seen the pictures the last couple of days, lined up in the Negev. Those pictures are intentional. Those are meant to put pressure on Hamas to come around and say, okay, let's deal, and let's talk about a reasonable negotiated agreement, not we're going to release 5 hostages for 7 weeks of ceasefire. Okay, that's a non-starter. By the way, the Americans say that that's a non-starter. So I'm not going to get into the pro and anti-Netanyahu issues here. I mean, people want to ask, I'll be happy to answer, but that's not my purpose at this point. So that's where we're sitting in Gaza. The rockets they just fired, and again, the Iron Dome alerts came on just as I came onto the Zoom. I imagine that they fired a few. I don't know if I imagine they didn't get through because the Iron Dome intercepted. And if 1 or 2 did, they did. This is all part of Hamas pushing back and saying, yes, we're still in the game. Yes, we're still ready to fight. And yes, we're still willing to fight. And maybe to close this whole point, Hamas has made clear from day one that they have no interest in surrendering. They will fight to the very last Palestinian because they really don't care. They are Wahhabi Muslim Brotherhood jihadis for whom life has absolutely no value. And if anybody would like references on that, you might be able to see behind me. That's not a screenshot. That's my actual library, or part of it. I'm sitting in a room with 10,000 books. So anybody who's ever bored and wants to sit and read for a few minutes, you're cordially invited to come and spend a few months here. So anyway,
if I could jump in with a couple questions,
yes,
which is I want to cover a lot of ground and ask you about the hostages, ask you about the Houthis, ask you about Iran.
Okay.
But I do kind of want to start with the hostages, and okay. I think everyone on this call, not I think, I know everyone on this call wants Israel to achieve both goals: the release of the hostages and destruction of Hamas. It seems that there's a lot of debate as to which comes first. You've explained those two goals are not in conflict, but they're not necessarily in concert, is what you said. But there's another kind of dimension to this for those of us sitting, we're all around college campuses, right? That's where our Hasbara students are, all around the United States and Canada. And of course, we're hearing all those buzzwords, and which we don't need to spend too much time on now, genocide and so forth.
Sure.
But one kind of, I think, kind of troubling argument I'm hearing recently, I just saw it on the BBC last night. Naftali Bennett was on, and basically he was challenged by an anchor asking him, well, wait a second, if this is about the hostages, then why are you fighting a war? You should be sitting and negotiating about the hostages. We know the basic response. We know military pressure is what actually motivates Hamas to act.
Right.
But I'm curious on if you could speak to us a little bit more about that, and what are you looking at? What should we be expecting? Not that you can predict it, but what should we be expecting over the next kind of few weeks?
Okay. So first of all, Alan, as you know, I don't do prophecy. I'm a disciple of 2 great political philosophers, Winston Churchill and Yogi Berra, who both said that it's best to prophesy about things that have already happened. But where I do want to break this down, and and this is lost, I think, in a great deal of the discussion, is that we speak of the hostages as if we understand what category they are in hostage-wise. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. There are actually three different types of hostages. One, which is not relevant to this discussion, is what I call the incidental hostage. Anybody who's seen the movie Dog Day in the Afternoon, these guys go in to rob a bank. The robbery goes south. They take hostages of the people who are in the bank. That wasn't their plan. It wasn't their intent. It was incidental. It's all they've got to negotiate with. Leave that. That doesn't apply here. The other two types are critical in understanding what's going on here, because we're assuming that they're all of category one when I don't believe that that's the case. Category one is the classic criminal kidnapping case, in which, and by the way, this was also typically used by terrorist organizations, including Hamas, in which you take hostages in order to trade them for something. For criminals, it's typically for money. For political organizations, it could be for prisoners. It could be for something else. But I'm taking them in order to trade them is the category. And assuming that that's the only category that Hamas is interested in, then the argument, well, we should just sit down and negotiate, makes more sense. The problem is that there's a third category, and it's clear that Hamas is holding at least some of them for that purpose. Now, some of them may be all of the ones that are left, but at least some of the 250 plus who were taken on October 7th. And that third category is a typical category of Nazis, fascists, totalitarians, and Hamas falls into all three categories. And that is with taking hostages for insurance purposes. Okay, the Nazis did this. Typically, they would go into a conquered area, round up a few thousand people at random, and say, the first act against one of our soldiers, we're going to shoot 300 of them at random. These people are not being held for negotiated purposes. In other words, nobody can go there and say, hey, let my uncle out. I'll give you something. They're not interested in that. That's not why they were taken in the first place. And as the numbers reduce, and here, let me say that in retrospect, analytically, from a Hamas perspective, and please don't misquote me. If this isn't clear, ask and I'll clarify. From their point of view and for their purposes, they took too many hostages on October 7th. They didn't need that many. It was unwieldy. It was a mess, which is why they were happy to return a bunch of them and get a bunch of their people out of Israeli prisons, murderers and terrorists and the like, because they didn't need 250. And however many were alive, 150, 200, doesn't matter. They didn't need them. They knew very well that they could reduce those numbers to a couple of dozen, which is where we are today. And let's be serious. We're talking about numbers much greater than that, but that are including bodies. And I'm very much in favor of bringing bodies back. But we're talking about perhaps 24 live hostages, and that's what they need. They can give away 5. They might be willing to give away 10. I don't believe they will. And Witkoff himself has learned the hard way that that's not the case. And still hold enough hostages for insurance. They know very well that the minute they return the last hostage, certainly the last living hostage, all bets are off. So there's a point at which now, here's where we get into the impossible moral calculus. And in case anybody misunderstands where I'm coming from, I believe that we have multiple moral obligations to get them out, starting with human, through Israeli, through Jewish, on top of the fact that it happened on our watch. In other words, it was our responsibility to protect these people. When I say ours, I mean the state and the military, and failed. So with all of that, very, very high obligation, but at all costs, and I hear that, bring them back at all costs. Let me ask people a question here. Anybody who wants to answer yes to this, show me somehow electronically. Hamas says we'll release the last 20 hostages if you line up 500 soldiers on the border of Gaza and shoot them. Anybody willing to make that trade?
No.
No. So it's not at all cost. It's at some cost. But there's a point where Hamas can bid too high and you'll just say no. My point here is to say the negotiations are over those sorts of things, but Hamas is now in a position where it's saying we don't want to give them up in the first place, so what we're going to ask for is exorbitant. And if you say yes, great, we'll give you a couple of them. But anytime anybody talks about getting them all out, you get silence on the other side because they are not willing to release all of them. Now the tough policy question. At what point does the leadership stop and say, we've gotten out all the ones that we're going to get out? And I don't have an answer to that.
To admit that. No one is going to want to admit that, I'm guessing.
Right.
Do you see a scenario, possibly something similar to if the circumstances change and there's enough military pressure, and for Hamas, the choice is either survive abroad and give up the hostages or die? I mean, is there some scenario similar to Arafat being sent from Lebanon to Tunisia in '83, and some scenario where they give up the hostages and in order to go try to regroup somewhere else?
Unlikely. I believe that the guys who are holding the hostages, and here also let's make a distinction between the Qatar gang living in their high on the hog hotels with their billions of dollars in the bank, and Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, who apparently is crazier than he was, and people like that who really do believe the fifth tenet of the Muslim Brotherhood. And remember, Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood. And the fifth tenet is death for the sake of Allah is our highest aspiration. Now negotiate. Okay, so we've got a problem.
Right. Do you see any potential for a happy ending here on the hostages, or what would you be doing if you were the prime minister?
Look, if by a happy ending you mean some sort of a deal that gets them all out, I don't see it. Now, I could be surprised. I'm not saying it can't happen, it's impossible, but if you're asking from where I'm sitting looking at Hamas, I don't see it. Now, will sufficient pressure perhaps crack the organization? Will sufficient pressure perhaps get the population to turn, because the population supports Hamas, and turn on them to the point where hostages are released, not by order of the leadership, but by the deposition of the leadership? It's possible. It's possible. High probability? No. But I think that's part of the strategy of what's going on now, along with striking directly at what's called the political leadership in Gaza. And we've been hitting them very hard over the past week plus. We took out the second prime minister of Gaza today. He may have set a Guinness record, shortest term ever, 5 days since we took out his predecessor. By the way, there are a whole bunch of executive positions open in Gaza for people who are looking for work. They're lifetime positions, but not with long-term possibilities. But here too, shake them up, loosen their control over the population. There's a strategy behind this beyond simply taking out the bad guys, in the hope that it'll work. And I think it's a hope. I don't see a linear do this and it will affect this and will cause this and get the hostages out. I think it's they're too locked in. And anybody who's watched Hamas over the decades, as I have, and I know, Alan, you have as well, we don't see too many cases of them turning around and saying, "Yeah, I'd rather live, and I'll give up my ideology." Another one of Witkoff's errors of a few days ago.
Well, maybe I'm being too, hopeful or bright-eyed here, or whatever you want to call me, but excuse me. I just want to ask you about two more, and then we can move on to the rest of the region, but just two other kind of levers of pressure here, which is one, is there more pressure that could be brought upon Qatar, the Qataris, which it just seems like they're kind of always outside of the discussion. They're in the discussion as excuse me. They're in the discussion as mediators, but you rarely hear anyone
Right.
talk about pressure on them. And then there's this new idea, and it sounds like it's unconfirmed. There's some reports out of the Ministry of Defense of this idea of actually annexing, for Israel to annex bits and pieces of the Gaza Strip, so as to and sort of that's a way of putting pressure on Hamas, right? In a way, it breaks their narrative, right? They're telling their people we're winning, and if they actually see Israeli annexation of parts of the land, perhaps that can get them to act differently. Is that any hope there?
I think both of them are amusing but unrealistic. First of all, okay, let's understand. Qatar are Wahhabis, old school. That doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean they don't know how to play the game. The Saudis did the same thing for well over a century. But they are hardcore jihadis, and they actually hold quite a bit of sway over the West, particularly America. Remember, America's Fifth Fleet is stationed in Qatar. In other words, they have a good deal of pushback against America, which is one of the reasons America is taking a very soft view. Even when America said, you've got to get rid of the Hamas leadership, they said, yeah. Where are the Hamas leaders today? In Qatar. So they know how to say yes and do whatever they want, and nobody's calling them on it. I don't believe that anybody will. They're also too heavily tied in financially to too many places. That's got to be unraveled. I don't know if you saw the ISGAP report that came out last week, Charles Small's report on Qatari investment in America in general and in education in particular. They're just they're too much in to simply threaten to cut off. Extracting them, and I think it has to be done, is a project that's going to take years, not hours. In terms of annexing territory, again, that's rhetoric. What does it mean? We're going to draw new lines. Nobody's going to take that seriously. Nobody's going to recognize it. Israel finds itself pushed out of that in no time. Build settlements in Gaza. Hey, we tried that. It didn't work too well. And here, just full disclosure, I wrote the defensive plan for Gush Katif in 2002. I was involved in evacuating Gush Katif in 2005. And in the last year, I've gotten a whole bunch of people who knew me and hated me. I'm talking about American Zionists. The Israelis are a different story. From back then writing, do you still think it was the right thing to do? And my answer is this. Tell me, what would have happened on October 7th if there had been 10,000 Jews in Gush Katif?
Gush Katif, for everyone's benefit, is the Israeli communities that existed in the Gaza Strip.
That existed in Gaza, that were an enclave completely surrounded. In other words, they were not continuous with the border with the Negev.
Right.
Okay, so what? We're going to go in and build a few settlements, and that's going to scare them? I don't see it. Like I said, it's rhetoric. It's one of those things you put up there and threaten. I think we're going to see more stuff like that because I think it harmonizes with Donald Trump's method of negotiating. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. Throw stuff out there and see who you shake up by it. But it's going to be a long time before, even if it became policy today, it's going to be a long time before Israel can actually execute an annexation policy in Gaza.
Okay. Right. And Elliot, you always tell it like it is. We've been with you for years, and you don't sugarcoat it. And it's, we're still hoping, for the hostages, and definitely keeping them in our prayers,
I
as
am
I'm
too.
sure you are as well. But not an easy situation. I want to ask
No.
you one more thing about Gaza, and then we'll talk about the rest of the region, and a
Okay.
little bit of the college campuses too. But just last thing on Gaza is, and if you could summarize it just in a couple of minutes so we can move on.
Sure.
Your reaction to the Trump plan. I mean, is it possible? Do you foresee immigration, voluntary immigration?
No, I don't see it, and I think the flaw in the plan comes back to Hamas. I think that what nobody is taking into account is how brutal they are to their own people. They will not permit, just as they tried to prevent evacuation of what's referred to as northern Gaza, Bet Hanun, Bet Lahia, Sajia, Jabalia, when Israel told people to evacuate southward to the Moasi, to the so-called humanitarian zone, Hamas's response was, if you evacuate, we'll shoot you. Now, there was enough of a strong wave that they couldn't shoot everybody. But I think that trying to get people to emigrate is a whole different story. And I think they'll take it much more seriously. They will simply threaten to kill anybody who wants to leave. And if you manage to get out, they'll kill your relatives. And I think that's going to shut it down quickly enough. Some people will go and some people will get out. But remember, we're talking about moving over 1.5 million people. Otherwise, there's no point to it. A plan that gets 100,000 Gazans out or 200,000 Gazans out, maybe a nice humanitarian plan to get them out from under the fighting, but that's not the solution that Trump is talking about.
Okay. All right. I want to move on from Gaza. You've given us a lot to think about.
Okay. Me too.
Just talk to us about the Houthis a little bit. And I mean, it's sounds like for the first time they're actually being punished for their actions. What do you see there? What are you looking for? How long do you think they're going to be part of the picture, and affecting the Iranians for real?
So
right?
first of all, the Houthis are Iranian proxies. There are two things going on with the Houthis. One that specifically affects Israel, and that is the nightly missile attacks that we've seen in the past, and now for the past 5 days, every night, evening, late at night, whenever they've launched a missile at Israel. Tonight's was early, so maybe there's another one coming later on. They typically do it at ridiculous, difficult hours, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And that's for show, if you will. In other words, it doesn't have a deep strategic effect, although it does wake up millions of people and get them into safe rooms. They've also cut a major maritime commerce artery in the world, and that is the Suez Canal. Okay, by blockading the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb into the southern Red Sea, the Suez Canal has become useless. And by the way, the country that's most directly economically affected is Egypt. And they're suffering terribly economically as a result. But almost as much is global commerce. And it's affecting everybody. Everybody's prices have gone up, whether you felt it or not. It's costing more to ship stuff globally than it did before. And the fact that the world has let this go on for over a year, to me, is unconscionable. This is something that the countries go to war over. And for over a year, basically, it's been la, 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 la. We'll take out a radar base or we'll drop a couple of bombs here or there. When they started the shooting now again, the Trump administration asked Israel not to respond and said they will take care of it. And the truth is that America has stepped up attacks, but that's not the taking care of it. And here's, you asked me at the beginning, what am I watching for? So here's what I'm watching for. The United States moves much more slowly than Israel. And I say that not critically, but analytically. America doesn't have to move at the speed that Israel has to move. First of all, America is an enormous country with 2 oceans as borders. And with the exception of a ballistic missile strike coming out of what used to be the Soviet Union, today Russia, which gives a 20, 25-minute alert, that's urgent. Anything else that happens in the world is not urgent existentially to the United States of America. In other words, it may be urgent to whoever it's happening to, think Benghazi in the day, but that's not something that America needs to mobilize its forces and respond to in hours or even days. America has time. So if the rumors are correct, and I say rumors because I haven't been able to confirm them, that at least one and perhaps two aircraft carriers are on their way to the region to bolster the one and a half that are already there. That's call it a 2-week lag. In other words, assuming America's greatest intent to be involved, we're looking at 2 weeks from 5 or 6 days ago. So we're still a week plus away from that. If it's also going to include landing ground forces like a Marine Amphibious Brigade or two, then we're still looking at another week or two before that happens. America is notoriously set piece in its movement. And here again, I say that not critically, but because when you're as big as America is militarily, you don't just send a few things and see what happens. Israel has to be able to respond quickly, and America doesn't. But let me just give you a sense of the scale of what that means just in terms of aircraft carriers. If 3 full-scale, full-size U.S. aircraft carriers show up for missions off Yemen, they will pack the equivalent Air Force punch of the entire Israeli Air Force. Think about that for a moment. They will have about half the planes of the Israeli Air Force, but they'll be launching from very close to their targets. In other words, they'll be able to fly more sorties in less time than it will take for Israel with mid-air refueling and turnaround and all of that. Okay? So from an Israeli point of view, if that's what America has in mind, and again, I'm not privy to that level of discussion, it's above my pay grade, but if that's what they're talking about, and we haven't responded, so I assume there's more involved in this than just an oblique threat by the Americans, don't do it or else, I think we're going to have to wait on this one for another week to 10 days and then see if it was a for real issue or just a bluff that is going to disappear. But we're a week to 10 days from seeing the answer to that question.
We'll be watching. And what about the Iranians? What obviously it's since October 7th. I think sometimes we forget and maybe we're rethinking what used to be our position before October 7th, which was that Iran is the greatest threat to Israel, right? And Hamas and Gaza has taken up most of our attention over the last 17 months or so. But that was always the biggest strategic threat, and I think still remains that way if Iran were to achieve a nuclear weapon. And sounds like we're hearing all the right things now, I think. Tell me if you disagree with that, but we're hearing a lot of the right messages coming out of Washington, and what's going to happen remains to be seen. What are you watching for, and any insights there on that?
Okay, so first of all, Iran is in a very different place than it was on October 7th. One of the great inhibitors to Israeli plans to strike Iran was Hezbollah. The Hezbollah threat for the time being has been removed. And I want to emphasize for the time being, because if we sit back and let them, within a couple of years, they'll be able to build themselves back up just like they did the last time around. But at the moment, at least, the Hezbollah retaliatory threat, which hung over Israel, I mean, there were other threats, but vis-a-vis Iran, where we knew that if we struck Iran, the Hezbollah of pre-October 7th was capable of firing 2, 3, 4,000 rockets a day into Israel. The Iron Dome was incapable of handling those numbers. We would have seen serious devastation in Israeli urban centers. That was an inhibiting factor. I want to say deterrent, but certainly an inhibiting factor in Israeli decision-making. Second, until we actually tested it, we didn't know what Iran's air defenses were going to look like. We tested it after they fired ballistic missiles at us, and in the two notorious strikes that failed for them, and we went after them and stripped them of their air defenses. So those are two major issues. Throw in the Syrian mess, which set them back as well. Iran is extremely vulnerable right now. So the question, what are we waiting for? And the answer is, I believe the urgency has been lifted. In other words, if it happens next week or next month, it doesn't make that much of a difference unless the indicators are that they're prepared to go nuclear. I'm sure that's being watched closely. Hopefully it's being watched closely enough to actually show that as an indicator. We want to do it. We've always said this, and I think this is absolutely the right approach, in conjunction with the United States, not just with an American green light, because nobody can do it like the Americans can. Let's be serious, with all due respect. I'm a ground officer. I love the Air Force. Let them do all the work. I'll stay home and drink coffee. I'm very happy with that. But with all due respect to our Air Force, anybody know what the three largest air forces in the world are? What are the top three? Three largest air forces in the world going once. Yes. Sadie. You're muted. Okay.
U.S. Air
U.S.,
Force.
UK,
U.S.,
UK, Russia. The largest air force in the world is the United States Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the United States Navy. And the third largest air force in the world is the United States Army.
Right.
So, with all due respect to the Israeli Air Force, which pound for pound is the best out there, there's no comparison. So if America decides, and let's understand, it's not just quantitative, it's qualitative. Israel doesn't have the equivalent of the B-2. And add to that cruise missiles, additional capabilities. If America decides to do it, I gave a briefing at a U.S. Air Force base a number of years back, and I said, listen, you guys can launch a leisurely air campaign against Iran. And we can't. A leisurely campaign means you bomb them in the morning, you come home, you have some coffee, you bomb them in the afternoon, you send the reconnaissance flights to see how well you did, and tomorrow morning you do it all over again and just rinse and repeat until the job is done. And the Israeli Air Force can do damage, don't get me wrong, can do massive damage, but not the way the United States can. And for military as well as obvious diplomatic, political reasons, for America to go in with Israel on it will be a tremendous advantage for Israel. Now, America doesn't want to, even under the Trump administration, if it can figure out a way out of it. Between us, I don't think they'll be able to. This isn't the Obama administration looking for a way out. They're going to try to negotiate something. In my opinion, it's going to fail. And then I think that Trump is going to use a variation on what I think is one of the most important lines in the book, The Godfather, the book, not the movie. But nobody can reason with these fellows. But I think he has to get there. In other words, the American system has to arrive at that conclusion before it decides to go to war with Iran. I've heard rumors that some of the negotiations with Putin include that. Perhaps, I'm not convinced, but it's moving in that direction. The threats are being made. if it takes another couple of weeks or a month or 2 months, and here, let me throw one more factor into this: the weather. Weather counts even in modern warfare, and we're still in a period where the weather is not quite stable. A month from now, 2 months from now, it's clean, clear skies 24/7. And then we're looking at something very, very different from where we are today. And that's that. Let's put it this way: if I'm in the planning room, and I've been in a few planning rooms in my day, that's a consideration.
And we're gonna have a couple questions here from the audience. I know Sam has a question. I know Avi has a question. If you want to start unmuting yourself, go ahead. But let me just ask you this to wrap up Iran, Elliot. I mean, are you optimistic? How are you? Sum it up in one sentence.
I'm optimistic that their military and nuclear capability can be set back indefinitely. Here, let's keep in mind that when something is done on that scale, you don't know what the ultimate outcome will be. And I'll just give you a very simple example. When the decision was made to take out Saddam's reactor in 1981, all the intelligence people here, and I know our intelligence people have lost a good deal of their luster after October 7th, but they're still pretty good at what they do. They said, well, it might set him back a year or two. And was one of the reasons that they argued against the strike. Well, it turns out that by taking out the Osiris reactor, we destroyed his nuclear program, and he never went back to it. So you really have no way of knowing what an outcome is going to be. But let's say in minimum terms, we can probably set them back a good number of years, which is already a good thing. And then who knows? Now, I'm not a great believer in regime change there, but it could happen. I say not a believer because I think there's a lot of optimism about it. But still, these are regimes, as we saw with Assad in Syria, that are extremely brittle. They're not fragile, but they're brittle. And sometimes a properly placed hard strike in one spot, and they just shatter. So setting them back a number of years, I think, is a good way to start.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all of that analysis. I want to give, especially the students, an opportunity here, even though we're a little low on time. I see Sam's hand is up. Go ahead, Sam. If you want to just introduce yourself, tell us your school, and go ahead and unmute yourself. Which
I think you need to.
Yeah, there we go. So
give them permission. There you go.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Leshens. I'm a Hasbara Fellow, and I'm a junior at the University of Florida, majoring in public relations. So, Elliot, thank you again for speaking with us today. It's great to see you again. Obviously, there's a lot of updates, even just from when you last spoke with us back in December. So, one of the things that I really see myself aligning with what you're saying in terms of is like not predicting the future. It's best to reflect on what's happened in the past. That being said, now being on college campuses, when I'm tabling in the middle of campus, and I have people coming up to me, and the first thing they say to me is, especially like after the AI video that Trump posted to whatever account it was. They said, is Israel endorsing this? Are they supporting another genocide? How could you possibly remove the Palestinians from their rightful home? I mean, like, immediately asking for my thoughts on it when I probably hadn't even seen the video until the day after.
Right.
So what I would ask you is, what would you tell these students? I mean, in my mind, I think the video is a little crazy, but I mean, I think he's onto something there. It's on it. The land is uninhabitable. There's
Right.
going to be inevitably buildings that are booby trapped and just unsafe for civilians to go into. And then even if they're there, at least under their own will, I think it's just a way to up the civilian death count, from the health ministry. So I would just wonder what you would say to those students.
What I would say to the students is an American plan is an American plan. If America, anything that can be made to work to improve the situation is something that we support. He himself has said he's not talking about forceful removal of a population. We would oppose that. If people want to leave voluntarily, how do you oppose that? In other words, if America comes up with a way, now parenthetically, I don't believe it's going to work, right? But if America can come up with a way to incentivize people to move somewhere else for their own good, where's your opposition? Like, what are you against here? In other words, that would be my response to that person. And if they say, well, like what? The place, as you said, it's uninhabitable. It's been a war zone. People themselves are saying they can't live there. If they agree to an American offer to go somewhere else, that's between them and America. What do you want from me?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's just so interesting because when I've alluded to that, they then like to say that it's Israel's responsibility to rebuild Gaza back and immediate like, and I just say to them, Israel wants nothing to do with Gaza. Once we eliminate Hamas and we get the hostages back, I mean that's we don't want to
Have a nice
Israel
day.
doesn't want to be
Right.
And they seem to think, oh well, Israel let's say bomb the hell out of Gaza, and now, oh yeah, they're gonna pay the reparations, they're going to build it back and all of that, and there's obviously a lot of flawed reasoning in that logic.
Let's go over to Ali so that we can squeeze in one last question. Although I can't resist just to give my 2 cents and just Hasbara's kind of advice. I think it's time to attack the Students for Justice in Palestine and their supporters, the SJP. I mean, and I would just point out, they've never, not when I was in college 15 years ago and not now, they've never cared about individual Palestinians. They care about a cause, right, but about the average Palestinian mother and father with a 5-year-old kid who they don't care. They care about a cause. That cause, we know, it's hating Jews. And if they did care, they would be a lot more open to that. They wouldn't be advocating keeping people imprisoned. And don't be afraid to say that.
By the way, if you have not read the Hamas Charter, read it.
Yes.
It is the most powerful argument we have, and it's in their own words.
Yes, it is. And we used to give that out. We used to have a paper. I don't know if we.
I know, I remember.
Yes. Avi, go ahead. If you want to just introduce yourself and tell us your campus, and you'll be our last question. For everyone else who wanted to ask a question, I apologize, but as usual, we'll have you first in line for next month, next session. But Avi, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. I'm Avi. I'm a sophomore at Tulane University, and I participated in Hotspur Fellowships this winter with Sam. So I kind of just wanted to circle back to your discussion of the hostages and ask how you think the Signs of Life videos, like the one that was released today of Tiosef and Elkanah, where they claim that they're speaking, for themselves and not for Hamas, and where they urgently beg for the voices of former hostages like Ohad to stop being silenced, how you think those videos affect the future of the war and like public perception, both in Israel and in the diaspora.
Look, even the Israeli media bills these as psychological warfare. Or is that's how they're headlined. So it is psychological warfare. The people who are most affected by it, obviously, are the families of those people who, on the one hand, want to see a sign of life. On the other hand, it's horrific. Anybody who believes that they're actually saying anything independently, what can I say? Anybody who seriously believes that, please let me know who your drug dealer is, because you're getting some really good stuff. And we know this from, in case we hadn't inferred it ourselves, we know it from hostages who we've gotten out, who've did videos, and they said outright, we had a script, we had to read it. They were literally or figuratively holding a gun to our heads. So, that in and of itself, the pure psychological warfare. In terms of its effect on decision making, none whatsoever. It can't. It simply can't. And let me just add a final point to this, because part of the deal here is ceasefires and lengthy ceasefires and that sort of thing. I will tell you now unequivocally, Israeli soldiers will die as a result of this past ceasefire. Now, you do the moral calculus of how many soldiers' lives are worth how many hostages' lives and under what circumstances. I can't do it. I don't know how to do that. As I said, we have a certain obligation, but there's a limit to everything. And here with this, let me add a final point to this. People say, well, Netanyahu, if it was your son, you would behave differently. My answer is, if it was Netanyahu's son, that would certainly be a reason for him to resign. Nobody whose relative is involved should be anywhere near the decision-making process. And I would include myself, God forbid, if I were in that. So, national decision-making, I would say, untouched by this. Personal feelings, something else.
Thank you for that, and it's and you're right. It's on the hostages. It's not easy, and certainly not easy for decision makers in Israel. Not easy for people in Israel. I'm glad you're okay and you're home. And although we've been in Israel several times, I think since October 7th, and our hotel in Jerusalem is full of families from the north who are temporarily living in Jerusalem, and so we've seen it firsthand. And I think what we can all agree on is we have to fight. Israel has to win, and we have to win the battle against anti-Semitism here in the U.S. and in Canada, and certainly on our college campuses. And that's what we're going to keep fighting to try to achieve. And I want to just wrap up by, Elliot, thanking you. Thank you for joining us. And we always learn a lot. You always give us a lot to think about. And I do want to just also, before we go, to especially the students on the call, just remind everyone, Hasbara has groups going to Israel again. We're going in May, June, and August. And so if you have not been on a Hasbara mission to Israel, please sign up. Now is the time. And if you have, send your peers, student leaders on your campus, those who are involved, those who are up and coming leaders. They're who we're looking for, as you know. And Elliot, we assume we'll see you. I hope. I don't know if it's on your calendar yet, but
it's not yet. But you know how to find me.
Yes, we do. All right, someone's gonna get an earful from me. What's going on? We definitely want to see you, and I hope we'll be able to really go back to what we used to do, which is go farther up north, and which is something we'll have to find out this summer. You'll tell me offline what the deal is, and what we
absolutely.
but we're looking forward to it. And thanks everyone for joining. And we'll send out the recording for anyone who wants to watch it, and we'll get an announcement for next month's leadership session as well soon. So thank you all, and have a great week.